Welcome to the Politically Asian podcast. We're just two Asian American buds talking about politics and the Asian American community in hopes of getting more Asians to talk about politics. We're coming at you live from Brooklyn and Queens. My name is Jerry Lim. My pronouns are they, them, and you can find me across the internet at Jerryaki. That's GERRIEYAKI. And my co-host.
Hi, my name is Aaron Yin. My pronouns are he, him, and you can find me on social media at Aaron Flarin. That's AARON FLARIN.
We've got a great guest for you today. They're the co-founder of Asians for Abolition and the founder of the Blasian March, which promotes Black, Asian, and Blasian solidarity through education and celebration. Please give it up for Rohan Zhou-Lee. Woo!
Hello, everybody. Like I said, my name is Rohan. My pronouns are they, sha, and tha. And you can find me at Diary of a Firebird on all platforms. So that's DIARYOFAFIREBIRD. I can spell. Oh, wow. And also on my website, diaryofafirebird.com. Other than that, also find me at Blasian March on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as blasianmarch.org.
We love a multi-platform artist.
Thanks.
All right. So we're going to start off with our Hot Take Hot Pot segment, where we each offer one opinion on the Asian community and space that we've been thinking about lately and discuss them. So I'll go first this time. So I've been reading a lot about Ukraine and Russia this week, I'm sure as we all have, and also just I feel like the selective attention that goes into covering this situation versus like Palestine, Yemen and Cambodia, you name it, right? And I realized that I've been getting most of my info through a combination of like Twitter and TikTok. The hot take is I believe TikTok is a more credible source for reading about, geopolitics and war-related things more so than like New York Times, Fox News, etc. Because I feel like they actively try to not tell us that. Whereas on TikTok, it's like, okay, people might be dumb, but someone will call them out. There's not as much of like like a pro-imperialist, pro-cop, pro-military like bias baked into it.
Interesting. Okay, let me think about that.
I'll cut out any of the silence, don't worry.
No, I think it would have been, I think it would have been worse if you said Twitter. If you said Twitter was where you get all your news, I'd be like, I don't know about that. I'm gonna give you a comfortable Japanese, somewhere between a Japanese curry and a hot and spicy Spam. Like, I feel like I agree with that take. I feel like, I love TikTok. I love TikTok. And I will say, if there's one thing about TikTok, it awards authenticity, I think. I think users really like resonate with it. Obviously, that can make things go viral that aren't true or like, whatever. But I think it also really like values and raises up firsthand accounts and different perspectives. So I don't know. I agree with that take. I think it's just kind of hard to get all your news from that because I'm just thinking about like the FYP. Yeah. Yeah.
I've been actively just like keyword Ukraine, keyword Russia, and just scrolling through all of them as well. Yeah.
That's like totally valid though, because I definitely agree that like, especially like US media, like they tend to like, I've noticed this like pattern of, one, trending topics guide where the news goes. And because of that, it's really difficult to like sit with something and be like, okay, let's process and analyze what's actually going on. Like the fact that we can go from the killing of a Black man in his home to a week later of an Asian woman being killed in her home, and then also in war with Ukraine. And it's like we're trained to think that these things that are no longer in the news cycle just aren't happening anymore. And so, I feel this. I totally feel this. I'm also going to give it a nice solid 5 Japanese curry. Because like that's actually what I was thinking. I was like, this is like, gotcha.
It's comfy. It's homey.
Yeah. Nice. All right, Jerry, what do you have for today?
So my take is also kind of TikTok inspired. My hot take is that I'll just speak to my people that the Asian community could really benefit from learning to say it's just not for me, and that's okay. Yes, this is from therapy. And I'm not talking about like from an achievement standpoint, right? Like I don't want people to see like, oh, that thing is like unachievable. It's not for me, and that's okay. Like, no, aspire to greatness. But like sometimes, like if you find yourself saying, I don't get it, that's okay, and let it go. You know?
To your point, it would be like if an Asian person jumped in and was like, "Oh, well, in the Asian community, we do this." Da, 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 da. Is that kind of what you're saying that Asian people should learn to not do?
No. I'm saying like, okay, you know what? Let me use like, from the perspective of a white person, which I am not. Like, I think white people don't know how to do that, like at all, because everything in the world, like, they're used to stuff being built for them. So when they're confronted with like culture of like any kind, like, you know, like Asian cultures or like flavor, they feel the need to take it and make it their own instead of like being like, you know what? No, like it's just not for me. And I don't need to like, you know, take this and make it my own and try to profit from it or something like that. Yeah. Just learning to say stop.
That's solid. For me, on like a personal perspective, like just seeing how so many like activists and organizers try to weigh in on everything and try to have an opinion, or not say an opinion on everything, but try to take up space on everything. I mean, I'm particularly looking at a lot of cishet, able-bodied Asian male organizers specifically, but you know, there's always this, we have to always like say something, and sometimes I'm like, maybe it's better just to amplify voices of those who are more marginalized around you instead of having to constantly take up space when that space can go to someone else who needs to be heard in the situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Aaron, you know, like we talk about Hasan Minhaj a lot on the pod or in our lives, really. And I think it goes back to that Patriot Act episode where he kind of talks about like you need to be selective sometimes about like what you put your energy into, because if you try to care about everything, you're going to burn out and then you can't even, you know, do anything.
Okay, at the moment, I'm definitely leaning towards like Joe's rice roll because I feel like the statement. I feel like there are some cases like in Rohan mentioned where I can see that like applies in, like an activist space, but I think for like Asian people overall, I'm just like having a little trouble. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble pinpointing it down to specific cases. So I think for some cases it could be spicy, but for other cases it's like, yeah, it just seems like a general mental health kind of thing to not always step in.
Yeah, that's fair.
I feel like I'm gonna keep it at the 5. I don't know why 5. It's just like it's like a solid statement. And I'm just like I am totally in this, and it's like it's the safe spicy where it's like if it's too spicy, it's like oh my god, I can't handle this. I feel like a white woman. Oh god, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Rohan, what do you have for us today?
This might get me in trouble, but
that's the best kind of take. We love those.
I think a lot of male leadership needs to step down. And I say that because like these past year or so now of like Stop Asian Hate, a lot of the political, I guess, upheaval in Asian American communities or Asian American organizing circles and spaces, I just keep noticing that a lot of these men who have created so much harm in the community, particularly towards like Asian women and Asian queer folk, are somehow like still like at the forefront and are still being given the most like attention, namely by like, you know, white media. And I find that really annoying because it's like, it's almost dismantling a lot of, you know, really powerful Asian femme and queer organizing is being pushed to the side for, certain narratives that, I mean, yeah, that's your story as an Asian cishet man, but if you are responsible for harming Asian women, then you have no business, at the forefront of our movements. You have no business doing any of this stuff unless you take accountability. And it's okay to take accountability for what you've done. Like a lot of us are trained to harm Asian women. Like society has normalized violence towards Asian women. I mean, particularly with all of the US neo-imperialism, the way we deport Asian American folks, femmes in particular, because of ICE. Well, not we, that's way the United States. I didn't do it, the US did it.
We the people.
Your people, not my people. Thank you. But yeah, I just think for a lot of us to really heal and move forward, a lot of leaders need to just like step back and be like, yeah, like I did a lot of bad things and I have yet to engage in myself, my own like self-hatred towards being Asian and my own self-hatred towards Asian women, really.
Okay, I'm also super curious who or what inspired the take.
Aaron's asking you to drop names. That's what he's really trying to do.
Well, honey, let me just pull my tea out.
Yeah. We can cut it in post if you want.
Oh my goodness. I won't name names on recordings, but
okay.
I do have a certain little accountability folder in my Google Docs.
You keep it.
Wait, I think we have one of those too, like just screenshots.
Literally screenshots and screen recordings. I mean, most of it's done to like my person, but I'm very just like, no, you know what? I'm gonna just keep this little folder just by myself. So
it's smart.
If she ever comes near me, ever again, she will try and she will fail.
Oh my God. Rohan's receipts. Yeah.
Right.
That should be a new show.
Yeah, exactly.
Our new segment on the Politically Asian podcast, Rohan's Receipts.
Rohan's Receipts.
But okay, before I give my rating, I will say I hear that, and I guess like it just because women are in charge does not automatically make it better, though, right?
Oh, that's a good point.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. No, I feel that. I guess like for me, it's more like, again, based on your choices and like centering the femmes who have done the work and have like a long record of like doing the work that is like healing and rejuvenating. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying, because I'm also thinking about, Clinton and her long record of harm. Or Kamala Harris and
exactly. That's who I'm thinking of.
People.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. No, that's actually a really good point, Jerry.
I would say I think that's I'll probably give that like a hot and spicy spam. It's also, I mean, similar to Jerry's, it's a little hard to give the rating without like the specific cases, like certain names are coming into my head and I'm not sure if they're the same names, in your head. So like we'll talk about this in post. I mean, okay, like a very obvious example. I think this one, like I think, Andrew Yang, back when he was running for mayor, I think that's very obvious, right? Like I think, we could talk about like the pro-cop narrative and just in general, a very tech bro-y vibe, and like that. But there are other names in my head that I'm thinking about beyond that I think make me give this a spicier rating. I do think for Asian, I guess speaking as a cis straight Asian guy, I think it is tough for some guys to hear that, which is why I think it's spicy. But yeah, I'm being a little conservative because I think I don't know the exact names. So I'll keep it at a 6 for now.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, Aaron. Like I'm not a cishet male, so like for me, like hearing like abuser step down, like yeah, that makes sense. All right. Like that's a mango sticky rice. But I think like I don't know. For me, like at the same time, accountability always good. Goes well with everything. So I'm gonna give it a sriracha. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna say on that one.
Nice. Okay, so we're obviously going to have a fun time talking after the recording.
Yes.
That much is for sure.
Subscribe to our Patreon to unlock it.
I might just put that Google Doc on your Patreon.
Okay, so today we're talking with Rohan about a bunch of things, namely like Asians for Abolition, the Blasian March, etc. And so we'll start with, some foundational stuff, like what inspired you to start Asians for Abolition?
I think it was, funnily enough, it was born out of a collective of Asian femme and queer organizers who basically had experienced a lot of harm from some cishet Asian male leadership. I should definitely say not all straight men are bad. I'm so sorry, Aaron. Not all straight men. However, certain straight men. Some folks in the group have been cyberbullied by some of these leaders. I myself was put in a very unsafe situation at a rally that I was helping organize, which was frustrating because it was like, in our group chat, I was like, I'm the only Black person in this circle. I am the only visibly queer person in this circle. And, when I'm at protests, I will wear a pride flag that has Black and brown stripes to affirm queer folks of color. And for me to be kind of like ditched and abandoned is just like many levels of, this is not how you treat your fellow comrade. And so some of my friends stayed behind, and when we caught up with the group, they were shouting lots of like very homophobic chants, all in Chinatown. So, it was myself and all these other Asian femmes who've been organizing in the community. We decided we should just form our own group and do our own thing. And that was kind of how we came across and formed Asians for Abolition. And the Blasian March was, for me, actually my healing process for what had happened. It was kind of in direct response to how I was treated, how other queer Asians were treated in that space. And so, one of my biggest concerns with that organizing space was that, it was in August of 2020 that this rally happened. And so, a lot of Black Lives Matter was still a pretty large topic in mainstream conversations and pop culture. We were just beginning to understand the extent of anti-Asian violence on the individual level. We still haven't really gotten to the systemic level within Stop Asian Hate as a political movement. But yeah, for me, I was like, you know what? Black Asian solidarity, I put on the table with leadership. They didn't want to do it. And so for me, it was kind of like, you know what? I'm going to organize a rally in my own way to, give equal space to Black and Asian folks, to Blasian folks. In response to what had happened, I was like, you know what? The only speakers are going to be women, queer folk, and disabled folk. No straight man will have the mic. I'm sorry, straight men. I feel like y'all have enough mics.
Yeah, just start a podcast.
So that was kind of the impetus for the Blasian March. Our first rally was October 11th, 2020. And it's kind of just what I thought was going to be this like small one-time rally is now in 2 years of organizing, and it's beautiful.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'm really sorry the violence that you described earlier happened to you. That sucks. And it's it feels really shitty when it's like you're in Asian spaces and you're attacked by like other Asians, because it's just like, what, aren't we on the same team? Like, aren't we all
Right.
trying to like, So I'm sorry, and I'm that sucks. I think it's like really beautiful that what you've built from that. Um, and I kind of want to give our listeners like who may not be as familiar with terms and things like that, like, what does abolition mean to you?
Oh, so for me, abolition is this really open, expansive idea where it's kind of like we look at structures in the system,
Mm-hmm.
analyze the ones that don't work, how they don't work, why they don't work, and how can we replace them with something better? Like,
Oh, okay.
like your mic is faulty. You should replace it with something else. That's
Yeah.
basic logic.
Yeah.
So, like, if something on, a global level or a nation level or a city level or a neighborhood level does not work, it has to be fixed or be removed. For lots of folks, mainstream media has taught us that abolition only means, removing prisons, which is I think, is part of abolition as an idea. It's not just removing prisons, it's creating new systems of accountability that the community can share and grow with together. Even what's happening now with Asian communities and education. We're seeing, folks advocating for Asian American history to be put into, curriculums. And that is a form of abolition too, because we are abolishing the erasure of Asian Americans. We are abolishing the invisibilizing of Asian Americans through education. Like, what we're doing literally is abolition, just being done in different structure. And, you see the backlash happening right now in many states. Like, some of my folks and friends in Illinois were telling me how, a lot of folks are protesting against having Asian American history in education. I'm like, what? Like, and it just shows that white power, or the mythology of white power, is so reliant on Asian Americans not knowing their own stories. It's so reliant on
Yes.
us not knowing who we are as Asians, to the point at which we are taught to invisibilize and erase ourselves. Like, so like,
Yeah.
Asian American education is abolition. That's actually a form of abolition that we are not naming as abolition. It happens all the time to us.
I do think framing it that way would help a lot of people get more on board with the overall idea of abolition and jails.
Agreed. Hey, thanks for listening to the episode so far. If you like it, maybe pause right here and give us 5 stars on either Apple or Spotify. It really helps the pod out, and it's free. But if you have some money to toss our way, consider subscribing to our Patreon. We're currently fundraising to get transcripts for our podcast episodes to make them more accessible, hire a video editor, and hopefully get Canva Premium to deliver better memes. So yeah, thanks for listening, and now back to the episode.
Because actually, like, I guess a related question that we have for you. So, you just mentioned that abolition is not just about, getting rid of prisons, jails, and the existing system we have right now. But we were curious, like, in your opinion, why do you think some Asian people, put a lot of trust into, like, the current criminal justice system we have and the police?
Well, I'm not in every single Asian person's head. That would be a lot of work. But
yeah. I love the word some. I'm gonna let it do a lot of work.
From what I've observed, I think it's so multifaceted. I mean, one, it is white miseducation and white mythology that structures a singular narrative that policing is only violent towards Black people. And, you know, I'm also borrowing a bit of Claire Jean Kim's racial triangulation theory here. For folks who don't know, that's the idea that within society, Asian communities and Black communities are pitted against each other through these like false narratives that, you know, Asians perform better academically, Asians have more wealth than Black people, Black people are dangerous, Black people are aggressive. Then enters a Black Asian like me, and everyone's like, "What is that?" But you know,
Yeah.
but I think it's partially our society is not allowing Asian Americans to know the history and the stories of police violence towards Asian Americans. I will uplift with consent the names Christian Hall, Yang Song, and Angelo Quinto. And I invite folks to Google those names, understand their stories, and feel free to look up other names. I mean, there have literally been Asian elders who've been harmed by police. There have been Asian infants who have been harmed by police. The list really goes on and on. I think that's part of it. Another part, I'm borrowing some observations from one of my friends, Ayana Leko. She's a Black woman who's now doing, I believe, her master's or PhD in Caribbean history. She kind of brought up to me this phenomenon, I guess, in immigration or the politics around folks who are immigrants. And there is the idea of like assimilation, or like how do you fit into the story arcs or the narratives of the new country. So for a lot of, you know, Asian immigrants, you're being forced with, there is no Asian story. Indigenous stories have been widely erased by the colonizers. So all that remains within the US cultural political structures are the white narrative and the Black narrative. And so, you know, it's like, where does anyone Asian, whether you were born here or not, fit into that structure? So it's either you would have to choose a white narrative and assume, you know, white mannerisms or white political ideas, or you have a Black narrative, which is, you know, the minority. It is in US mythology, it is the losing story. So if you're trying to assimilate into a new culture, why would you align yourself with a losing narrative? And the losing narrative is not with the police. The winning narrative, which is, you know, based on white mythology, is pro-police.
I think definitely the names of Asian people who have been harmed by police, that's something that not a lot of Asian Americans who are even, you know, like Gen Z, millennials don't even know about that. So I think it creates this perception that like, oh, police may have been bad to Asian people in like the 1960s, 70s, 80s, whatever, but things are okay now. And it's like, no, that's actually not the case at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, Aaron. I feel like, you know, obviously we hear about like the victims of like attacks, but like we don't really ever hear about like Asian victims of police brutality as much. And then I know on the pod we kind of talk about this a lot, or at least in our memes. Like just a reminder to our listeners that like immigration and customs enforcement, like ICE, is part of the criminal justice system, and they deport Southeast Asians on the regular. I wonder if there are any numbers on East Asians for that, but we can do that in a different episode. But anyway.
Actually, there was a report in the Washington Post a year or two ago, and they actually reported that in 2019, at least in the city of New York, ICE had deported majority Chinese people, followed by Indian folks. Yeah. So ICE, like you said, it is a huge crisis in our system that, you know, Asian Americans are not only learning about, but not being allowed to learn about by the colonial state, as well as we're not giving ourselves permission to look beyond white narratives.
It's tricky because it's like, I mean, kind of bringing back what you were talking about earlier about, you know, Asian American history. we don't have history in the textbooks for the past. And we also don't have any news outlets talking about government and police, deporting or like being aggressive towards Asian people right now. So it's like the past and the present are both kind of not readily accessible to us. Yeah.
I'm like trying, I'm trying not to get like, I don't know, thinking about like representation, right? Like that's like a really big topic for a lot of like Asian Americans who are just now like starting to realize they're not white. And
Good morning.
Right. I don't know if like I want to frame, I don't know if I want to frame media representation as abolition, but it's almost like I feel like we have to be careful about the narratives we also put out there about ourselves, right? Like this Aaron, I think we talk about this a lot, like with the whole like, there's Crazy Rich Asians and then there's like House of Ho, Bling Empire. I don't know. It's just like when we write our own stories, like what are we also saying with that,
Yeah, it's something I have also kind of struggling with as a writer, just being like, how do you write without the white gaze over your shoulder? Like, how do you write our stories without being like, this is not to appease any sort of like colonial construct. This is to appease myself. And it's to be like, no, I'm here to uplift my people. That's such a struggle I always been contending with as well. Because like, even though like what you're saying, like, yeah, when we talk about representation, I do think in many ways that is also, like you're saying, it is a form of abolition, but I think it's a step towards a better form of abolition. Like, I feel like it's almost like pre-abolition is in media is representation. But when we get more to, okay, now we have representation, can we now talk about actually giving us, work that's for us, by us, Can we finally have a superhero story that's not dependent on a white story about Asian people,
No, this is, we actually have a kind of a related question. So something we see in some Asian spaces, and this is what, we want to ask you about as well, especially with, all the attacks, going on right now. I'm wondering like your thoughts on, Asian people who say like, oh, like if you bring up Asians being racist to black people, that's like very divisive. We should be together as the Asian community right now. And if you're bringing that up, you're just kind of pandering to the quote white gaze. Mm-hmm. What are your general thoughts on this type of sentiment?
Oh, that's a tough one because I feel like this happens to me all the time on both sides of the aisle. I'm just like, I am not responsible for your lateral violence. Leave me alone. I feel like it is critical to the conversation. We have to talk about how we've harmed each other. Otherwise, there's no way we can build long-term lasting solidarities. We have to have those healing conversations. We have to understand the intention of the conversation. Like you're saying, like a lot of us, like it's not the right time to talk about these things. No, it is the perfect time to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't, we run the risk of creating more layers of harm across our communities, creating more stories of harm across our communities. And, if we're going to think about long-term solidarity, we have to have those tough conversations. It's just inevitable. And
oh yeah,
sure, like Black Asian solidarity was a trending topic. I am no longer a trending topic. It's hilarious. My existence no longer matters to the media. Therefore, I don't exist anymore. Sorry, that was me venting.
That's what this is for.
No, thank you. But I think folks who do have that argument, I see that, I hear it, but we should have that conversation outside of the white colonial gaze. Because when we organize only in response to white narratives about us, it's never going to be sustainable. We are actually creating spaces, or we are organizing in a way that is dependent on the white gaze, and we can't do that. So yes, this is a necessary conversation, and yes, we can do it in a way that is not dependent on white narratives.
So when you say like organize beyond or outside of the white gaze, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you mean like having conversations like about Black and Asian solidarity outside of like when it's a response to like an attack or like something like that? Or do you mean something else?
Actually, yeah, that's exactly what I mean. I feel like, yeah, Black Asian solidarity only pops up when, there is an extreme wave of violence. And as we all know that, we live in a culture of trauma. We live in a culture of violence, and basing our actions on violence that is deeply rooted in colonization, I don't find it constructive. I think these conversations need to be had. The conversations between communities that we have outside of mainstream news and influence, I think, is more impactful. It's more meaningful and it's more powerful because we're doing it in a way because we actually show genuine interest in healing across communities, not when it's only a trending topic or when it's Black History Month. Because February 29th, it's over, because it's not a day in the month.
Yeah.
I think that is so critical to our organizing. So, for example, this podcast, yay! I think it's so critical.
Yay! Thanks.
Yeah, because it's like, it's not only just having the conversation outside the narrative, it's like we're laying track work and groundwork for long-term conversations in the future.
Yeah, I do agree. I know Jerry, like, in my own opinion, when, I'll say like when I see East Asian people do this, it really reminds me of white people who really hate critical race theory because they don't want to talk about how white people were like bad, but I do agree that like you cannot move forward with healing without like addressing like the very large elephant in the room. And I do see how right now, like, if we're only bringing it up when attacks are happening, it does seem like, okay, yeah, if this is only happening then, I can see like timing wise or like why people might be against it. I mean, I do think right now is like a good time to talk about it and also just to continue it after, attacks are over, even when nothing is happening.
I think like I think the timing is like the emphasis, right? Like when we do whataboutisms, like right after an attack, like people aren't ready to have those conversations, I think, because everyone's hurting. Like no one's trying to fix anything right now when we're like, like we're hurting. So I see I feel like that's a really good path forward, at least to like just talk it year round, right? So yeah, kind of going down that same thought process about like Asians being racist to Black folks. What about like the reverse narrative, right? Like what about when folks say like Black on Asian hate crimes, and things like that? Like what's the right way to respond, organize, handle that, I guess? And yeah.
I tend to respond with facts, because again, this is a part of white mythology and how white mythology maintains its control over our communities by only emphasizing specific hate crimes. And by only amplifying the moments where the perpetrator is Black. And when that happens consistently, again, if we organize based on mainstream media, we'll be then basing a lot of our solidarities on the assumption that Black people are vastly responsible for these hate crimes. When the Virulent Hate Project released a survey that in 2020, 89.6% of anti-Asian violence came from white people. And that's something that's not at all promoted in mainstream media. When the numbers came out, you saw how quickly Stop Asian Hate lost itself as a trending topic. It was like, oh, we're moving on. Like, what do you mean we do all that stuff to y'all? No, that's Black people.
No, 100% that. And I know like hate also across these different research projects is like defined really differently, as whether like physical attacks to like saying a slur. There's like a whole broad category.
Right.
No, but I 100% agree with like there's that. And I also feel like it's like one thing that's not really mentioned is like the class element. Like oftentimes, you know, like when like the media highlights a perpetrator who's Black, oftentimes it comes with like a robbery or like stealing. And it's like, I guess my question for Asian people who think this way is like, you know, why do people steal? Like what, you know, what are the factors and lifestyles that like lead to someone wanting to rob someone else, right? Like we don't see like rich Black people going down the street like randomly stealing some from like Asian elders, right? Like that's not happening, right? I think there's definitely a class element that's like not being explored a lot by media as well. I know race is a very visual language, but I think there's such an emphasis on race over class right now, when I think that's like oftentimes informing, especially like a lot of the robberies and stuff like that. I think that's like a huge element that's like no one's talking about.
I'm just like trying to like let that marinate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just thought, I think when I talk with, you know, Asian people in like my DMs about this, it's like, yeah, like we are not seeing a lot of, you know, like rich Black people attack Asian people on the streets. Like, I think just the acknowledgement of class is kind of, when I think New York Times and other media, it indexes so heavy on race, when race may not be like the primary, you know, driver of like what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something I'm really thinking about right now when people talk about like Black on Asian hate crimes. Like, is it Black on Asian, or is it like poor on rich? You know, that kind of dynamic.
I really appreciate that assessment, because I think it brings in a nuance that, again, we're not being taught because we don't understand things outside of certain narratives that present control over our communities. Yeah, thank you.
It's been on my...
I'm so glad you said it, because now I'm like, oh, things that we never really discussed because we're so like hyper focused on this like specific narrative. But yeah, also when you said like, you know, how we define hate crimes, I really, really appreciate that you said that, because, you know, what is a hate crime? And we should acknowledge how legal definitions are built to protect whiteness. I mean, literally the fact that the shooter in the Atlanta spa shooting, they couldn't get him on, you know, racial bias, when we, the people, were like, this is clearly a hate crime, you know, or the shooting of the Sikh folks in Indianapolis, and how also that was like, well, there's no evidence it was a hate crime. I was like, it seems pretty evident. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so like I love that you said it, because then it brings into conversation like class. It also brings into like more historical context of how literally hatred for Asian folks is so deeply rooted in our government, in our policies, in, you know, how we move politically within government. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, Angel Island, and how, you know, lots of Asian immigrants were allowed into the stolen land because it was assumed that they all had a disease. You know, you fast forward a couple of centuries, and that rhetoric is very much a part of COVID-19 and the pandemic we're in right now. Or the Page Act, which restricted Asian women from immigrating here under the assumption that they were all sex workers. You fast forward to today, and the sexualized racism towards Asian women is still very much a part of our culture. So I think it's great that you said that, because then it helps. I think it'll help people look at how systemically there is a long line of anti-Asian hatred that Black people did not do, because guess what? We were not in government when we did all those things. So like,
we were not in charge.
We were not in charge. So how are you blaming me for white people shit? Like,
yeah. You know, going back to Aaron's class analysis, I wonder what y'all think about this, but I wonder if it has something. I'll take a step back. I feel like generally speaking, Asians kind of have a hard time discussing class. Maybe it's because like talking about money isn't like something we do. I don't know. But I also wonder if like a lot of like the ideas of success and like the Asian American slash Asian immigrant idea of success is like money. It's like like hardcore greenback capital. And I feel like having to assess that, or like when you've been so focused on that for so long, I don't know, it feels like kind of ironic that like you can't think about class, but like that's all you think about at the same time. Does that make sense?
Oh,
Totally,
yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, or it's like you can I maybe like some Asian people. I always put the word "some" now as much as possible, but it's like some Asian people like they can talk about money and maybe understand it in like a rich Asian, poor Asian context, but then applying it to like other races is like a whole new like mental leap.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Can't buy your way out of racism.
Yeah, exactly.
Nope, because money is rooted in racism.
Yeah. And then Rohan, you know, we kind of wanted to ask like your opinion, you know, about like the whole hate crime thing and like it being systemic. But like, what are your thoughts on like even just relying on like the hate crime designation? Like, do you feel like the push for like having something designated in a hate crime, like isn't that kind of relying on the criminal justice system in a way?
It does, so long as we are unable to change the legal definitions of hate crimes. And so long as we remain really unable to put the needs of the survivors or the families of the victims first. And yeah, no, it still is difficult when, you know, we still have to figure out transitions from criminal justice to reformative justice. What does that look like when sometimes the person who was harmed wants criminal justice as a solution? What does that mean for us? That is something I am constantly grappling with. So I'm like, well, we center the survivor, but if they want that person to go to jail for 10 years, is that really going to solve the issue? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
100%. No, Jerry, I remember when we talked about this a long time ago. It was in California, like someone kicked like an old Asian guy in California. And like instead of going to jail, this person was sentenced to like a lot of some kind of like rehabilitation programs, which, from like a restorative justice point of view, it's like, okay, this actually makes more sense than throwing them in like solitary confinement for 10 years where they will probably pop out worse. But I do know, like Rohan, like you mentioned, like at the time, like, yeah, like, the families were like very pissed, like rehabilitation program. Like, we want this person, like, K-worded essentially. It's like
unalived, as they say on TikTok.
Unalived. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a constant debate I have internally, but, and that's when I keep hoping that we must keep planting seeds about, political education, about abolition education, because I'm very sure in the short term, some folks are not going to understand the real power of restorative justice as opposed to criminal justice.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
I just hope that we just, stay focused on continuing to educate our communities on, which one actually serves us better, which one between the two is actually real justice for everybody, and how we can still honor everyone's humanity, as hard as that can be sometimes. Some folks, like a certain man who is orange, I cannot respect his humanity.
I had to think about that one. It's out my head already,
Yeah. We can let, okay, child. And even for myself, sometimes that's really hard when, sometimes when I demand for an Asian male leader to step down, for me, that is the constant, am I looking at this as a carceral sense? For me, is it he doesn't deserve this role anymore? Or is it, can he go through some sort of healing and then come back when he is ready? Is that a better way to look at things? And am I looking at everything as, and that's the thing that I have to constantly assess in myself. You know, it's like, am I looking at things through a carceral light because I'm so well conditioned to think that way?
Yeah. Got it.
Can you expand briefly on like what you mean by like carceral light? I just yeah. I just want to make sure we're clear.
I guess to me, carceral is, like you said, it's criminal justice, but like in our day-to-day living. So for me, like cancel culture is carceral. The idea that a person makes a mistake and must be punished for it to the point at which they can no longer be part of the community. Like to me, like carceral perspectives are like, how do we punish somebody for their mistakes, as opposed to how do we hold them accountable to do better?
Okay.
Yeah.
So like extremely punitive, violent reactions to things.
Okay. I guess recently in my personal life, I had to actually handle a similar situation. There was a person in my life who was violent with me. And when I kind of made it public, folks were like, oh, like, I'll stop being friends with him if this is true. And I was like, no, I would rather you hold him accountable to his therapy. I mean, I will never speak to him again. Like, I am done. Like, I can cancel that person out of my life forever. I'd be very happy if that was the case. However, I still do not want them to be isolated for something, you know? Like, that would not be fair to who they are as a human being.
I like that. Yeah, like the human capacity to change, I think, is the right note to end on.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, we're coming up on time.
I got all day. It's fine.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Rohan, for coming on the pod. We've come up on time, and let's let the listeners know where else they can find you on the internet.
Oh, it was so good to be here. I'm so grateful. You can find me on all social platforms, Diary of a Firebird. So TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, my website, diaryofafirebird.com. I am responding to my emails for gigs and stuff. So please hire me for something.
Nice.
I would love, much as I'm like, abolish money, I'm like, we must also survive in this capitalist structure.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yep.
And I am also reachable through the Abolition March. We also have a Facebook page, a TikTok, and Instagram, and a Twitter. And you can also find me on abolitionmarch.org.
All right. Lovely. All right. Well, that's our episode. Again, you can follow the podcast at Politically Asian Podcast on Instagram, at Politic Asian Pod on Twitter, or email us politicallyasianpodcast@gmail.com. We also take episode ideas, and if you know an Asian person who would be a great fit for this pod and want to hear them talk about something, send them our way. Otherwise, you can help us out by leaving an Apple or Spotify review. Cool. Thanks for listening, and
bye.